Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome to the MindTrace Podcast, episode number 4. I'm your host, Ajmal Savari, and today we'll look into the UX problems within academia with our guest, Ian. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MindTrace Podcast. In this podcast, we're bridging the gap between science and its application in UX. We're having conversations with guests from these two worlds, all with the aim of figuring out the UX of certain industries, how UX can use scientific discoveries, what UX industries can learn from each other, and what questions UX has for science. Our guest today is Dr. Ian Cameron. Ian works at the exciting interface between academia, entrepreneurship, industry, and society. He's driven towards the societal applications from neuroscience and psychological research and brings management and entrepreneurial practices to academia. Ian holds an MBA where he wrote his management thesis about the alignment of culture, structure, and strategy to achieve societal impact from research. Before getting his MBA, he earned his PhD from Queen's University in Canada and did a postdoc at UC Berkeley. Both involved human neuroimaging and behavioral studies. Specifically, Ian specializes in cognition and sensory motor control in movement disorders, making use of functional magnetic resonance imaging, also known as fMRI, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or called fNIRS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, known as TMS, and eye tracking techniques. As a researcher, he is interested in big-picture questions that connect neuroscience discoveries to clinical and societal applications. In this conversation, we talk about the academic experience. We discuss various aspects going from the standard career path to the transfer of knowledge into society, and all the way to the relationship of academia and industry. We try to discuss problems within the system and how business practices could potentially offer a fix. You can find Ian on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IN/IANGMCAMERON or on Twitter under @Ian_GM_Cameron. Enough background. Let's get into it, shall we? Well, Ian, welcome to the show and for taking the time in the first place. It's so today the whole idea was to talk actually about UX problems within academia and how potentially business practices might help. Mm-hmm. And I want the audience to understand why is it that I'm specifically talking to you about this. I mean, we have known each other since I think officially 2015. Mm-hmm. Unofficially 2014. I actually haven't met you first. I actually met your wife and your daughter on a train going to the NCM conference, which was in 2014 in Amsterdam. Right. And I thought was such a coincidence that they we talked just openly, and then your wife said, like, yeah, my husband is a researcher too. I was like, oh yeah, where does he work? Oh, he works at the Donders. Like, me too. Wait a minute, with me too, exactly. So I was like, oh yeah, his name is Ian. And then I remembered Peter was my supervisor, telling me that excitedly telling me that you just joined the Donders and that he wanted you to come to a lab meeting of ours to present your work. Yeah. It just unfortunately took much more time until that happened, but that's how I knew who you were. And yeah, that all happened in 2014. Yeah. But so what I want the listeners to understand is, why is it that I'm talking to you about these things? Could you tell us a little bit about your career path, how your studies started, what you then did during your PhD, and how it went on from there?
Sure. So I'm Canadian, and I did my bachelor's studies in life science, which would be kind of like biomedical science in other countries. And I got introduced to a laboratory of Doug Munoz in Canada, and he studied sensory motor neuroscience. And it was really fascinating to me, so I was fascinated with the topic of sensory motor neuroscience. I thought about different careers at the time. I thought about being an optometrist, a neurologist, the standard things you'd think of when you learn about the brain and vision, and you're excited about them both. but I discovered that I really liked research. And I joined the lab and then eventually did a PhD where I looked at sensory motor eye movement control in neurological disorders. And I really enjoyed my time there. And I knew that, I really liked, as much as research, I liked universities as an environment. I liked the creativity, and I liked how they were working towards research and goals that can help society and so on. I also really enjoyed how the culture was at Queen's and in the lab. And we had many different types of scientists working together. And we also had structural support, such as lab managers and programmers and statisticians. And it was a great environment of different people working together towards more common topics and common goals. And that was something that I assumed would be the way most research would be run. And it fit with the way I would want to run research myself.
Makes sense.
So then I did a postdoc at UC Berkeley with Mark Desposito, doing more focus on neuroimaging, so fMRI related to eye movements and sensory motor control. And I really enjoyed my time there. It's a bit different being a postdoc because I was much more into my own project, less teaching and so on. But I still liked the idea of eventually being a professor because I was always interested more in a lab and having a team of people working together towards some common goal. And of course, a postdoc is a necessary part of the training. And then I came to the Netherlands, to the Donders, because the Donders is very well known in topics related to sensory motor neuroscience, Parkinson's disease research, and the neurological disorders I've been studying, as well as, of course, neuroimaging and fMRI. And scientifically, I knew it was a great environment. And also, they'd advertised this position called senior researcher, which was a novel type of position that didn't exist in North America, but it really fit with my vision for an academic environment. So what it is recognizing that within the whole system of a university, from professors down to bachelor students, there would be different types of people at different levels of function. So the senior research position was designed to say, in a large lab where there are many students and postdocs, of course, unified around some general topic, it is a lot of work for the senior professor to be in charge of that, plus teaching, plus supervising all these students. And at the same time, before we hand the keys to a person who's straight out of their postdoc and say, now you're a manager, now you're running a lab, we can build a kind of a layer in between. So it's a great idea, right? And it fit with my kind of attitude towards research, right? So I come in as really an assistant to a more senior professor, doing my own research line, doing some of the teaching, contributing to some of the organization of the institute, while also getting experience in supervising my own students and so on, right? And so that's the other reason why I came. And it's quite a nice idea for a position that is quite not common in academia, but I think fills a necessary place.
So for the people that are more familiar with the normal structure,
correct,
being like, okay, you do a bachelor, then you do your master, then you do a PhD, then you do a postdoc, then you do assistant professor, then you do associate professor, correct, then you're a full professor, and then at some point you retire.
Correct.
But where in this progression is the senior researcher position?
It would overlap with that of an assistant professor.
I see.
However, it's not tenured track, so the design is not for it to directly lead to your own research line. The design is that it can, right? So you can then re-enter the tenure track system by reapplying.
I see.
But it gives you more experience, and it gives you the type of experience that you probably wouldn't have got in a postdoc.
Oh, for
One
sure.
that's more about supervision and more about contribution to a larger group of people, as opposed to trying to, as soon as possible, be by yourself doing your own idea. Right. So that is where it fit.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, I've heard about that position before.
but only in the Netherlands, I have to
Yes.
say.
Yeah.
I have not seen that anywhere else.
Well, I think it's a good idea. It might reflect a bit of the culture of the Netherlands, but it is something. So from my perspective, if you were to think outside of the academic system, I mean, someone who's not in academia, many jobs have hierarchies, of course, and there's positions that enter you into other positions. But in most companies or most organizations, you're trying to find a fit for a task or something that needs to be done, right?
Right.
So it's it breaks from saying that there's an academic model of these positions that you just described, and this is the way we do research, to start to say, well, hang on a second. Sometimes research might need more supervisors. Sometimes research might need a dedicated lab engineer.
I agree.
Sometimes research might need, people looking after finance and management or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it was more of a position related to a need within the research system.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned our companies and that they try to find the right person for a specific task when that task, performing that task becomes necessary.
Right.
But I would say even when that happens, the person that gets hired still gets training
Yes.
for quite some time to be able to do that task or perform it very well.
Well, we hope they do.
We hope.
Yeah.
And I've not seen that often in academia at all. It's just like you go through these ranks, but I've never seen, for example, somebody that for example, when I did my postdoc, nobody sat me down and said, okay, this is now what you need to focus on.
Yeah.
Or these are now other things that you didn't have to deal with during your PhD that you now should think about. Didn't happen at all. It was just more of a, deal with it when it comes up type of scenario.
Yes, I agree. It is a standard thing, and I think so. Then partway through my senior researcher position, I realized that as much as I liked the position and the way the Donders had created such a position, it was not enough, right? They created something that still is not recognized in the entire academic system, and wasn't truly addressing the need like you're describing. So that's why I went and did an executive MBA program. One of the reasons was to address this type of problem, right? So I still believe that research, even if it's basic science, and even if it's to be creative as possible, should think more in terms of the necessary structure, the necessary culture, and the necessary organizational elements to make the research successful. So yes, it is really good to have creative ideas and independent thinkers, but that need not be the only mechanism. So the idea of saying, this is the way research is done, it is done by you in this position that we've invented called a postdoc. And in this postdoc position, you have to teach yourself all the tasks, and then you leave after 3 years. That is merely a system, but it's not built with an organizational thought. It's not built with saying, in order to do successful research, we need temporary postdocs who figure out everything on their own. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was one of the drivers for me to go do an MBA, not just about business, but about understanding management and organizations, and just the attitude of, if this is our mission, then how are we aligned to getting towards this mission? And that mission can be applied research, but that mission could also be creative basic research. But it's the thought process of, what are the necessary elements in order to make this good?
Right. And so when you did your MBA and you learned about, I assume, management, structures, process flows, and then when you learn these new aspects and you look back at the academic system, where were parts where you think, okay, here it's where it's going wrong? What were some core things where you thought, okay, this is easy to identify?
Well, there's a couple. So first you already mentioned is at some point there should be a focus on skill training. So everybody would like to think that companies will always train their employees. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right? Doesn't always happen. People are busy. There's budgets to consider and so on. But for academia, especially because we're doing something very complex and technically oriented, there should be a focus on skills training. So in other words, starting from, there's a difference between saying to a PhD student, part of your training is, of course, to demonstrate that you're an analytical thinker. And that means that you can't rely on someone to do your analysis work or do your data collection for you. That would be inappropriate. But there still could be thought about the type of training that would be needed so that the PhD student can take their own initiative to say, I got as far as this, now I need help. Mm-hmm. I'm now outside my skills. Where can I go to be trained on these skills, right? And this kind of thing, right? And then there's a lot of without that, there's a lot of, not, I wouldn't say redundancy, but there's a lot of reinvention of the wheel, right? The person next to you could have struggled with the exact same problem as you, and both of you struggled for a month. And there's not an attitude, or there often isn't an attitude towards providing the necessary training, documentation, and being able to try to speed up the process so people are not spending their time reinventing the wheel, mm-hmm. right? So that's one important thing that we talked about. The other thing that I think is really important is more attention to the people and just an understanding of, what are the personalities of a researcher. How are researchers motivated? How is a PhD student motivated? How does someone, when they're older, what is an older person? What would likely, based on age, makes you find you excited to get up in the morning and be more motivated when you're older than when compared to younger? Like these kinds of things that I think come from understanding the people and understanding the organization, right? So there are consequences to demanding papers, mm-hmm. for instance, research papers, when at the same time demanding high quality research, right? And there's often not there's not enough attention, I think, paid to management structures. So what I also got out of the MBA is how important it is, say, for senior members to walk the walk and talk the talk, how important communication is, how important there might be to have HR managers or something that's looking after the way people work. There needs to be more attention to what makes a good team. There needs to be things looking at the other stakeholders who are involved. These types of management tools that usually haven't been present in academia, where it's much more about just encouraging an individual to figure out everything on their own.
Yeah. Do you think that that's just a remnant of just the historical development of science?
I think so. So my view would be, so there are lots of good things about science. So one good thing about science is it really is it's always been creative, and it's always been one of the first examples of the knowledge worker, right? And so I think that there were less people in it, right, originally. So when there's less people in it, it could evolve into its own culture and its own structural way of doing things without actually having to consider how other people do it, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing. So first I think is that it just was evolving in its own way. It was effective, but it was the only mechanism, right? I can't really think of other way basic science was done. Now, applied science, on the other hand, Bell Labs, for instance, NASA. I mean, they have ways of creating patents and Nobel Prizes on, and even they would of course have had. They made basic science breakthroughs in their pursuit of these kinds of things. But with the exception of these types of organizations, I think historically it's been around for a long time. The idea of a professor is a teacher. The idea of the gentleman scientist, this kind of thing. And then I think what happened is as science, as more people entered the system, and we started to look at different structures within it, the postdoc position was created, right? It never always existed, but the idea of, especially in the medical sciences of biomedical, needing more training before you can have the skills to run your own lab or something. So there was some sort of evolution, but I think a lot of it has just been historical. It's been the way we've been doing things.
Right.
It works in the sense that it does create Nobel Prizes. It does create breakthroughs. But if you actually look at it, it is not necessarily that efficient, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a big problem. It's because, as you said, I mean, more and more people are entering the system. And so I just looked at some numbers yesterday, and I was amazed to see that. So I just looked at some numbers in the Netherlands and worldwide, but they resemble each other very well. Is that since 2000 until now, for example, it's an insane amount of new PhD students that come in and that also graduate, which is crazy. I mean, the system, at least as far as I experienced it, universities are structures that, when it comes to, I would say bachelor levels, it's well organized. You can have a certain volume that you can teach. But when it comes to PhD students, because that PhD is such a personal relationship and work environment that you have to have with your supervisor, you cannot have one supervisor with 20 PhD students and expect the same type of quality. It's just time-wise, that's right. Impossible.
Exactly.
And no, I agree with you that, I mean, something needs to shift. Also, I mean, you mentioned that the postdoc was created. I didn't know that. When I first heard the term assistant and associate professor and then full professor, I only knew about the full professor. So to me, it sounded like, oh, okay, these two are also sort of like added on as intermediate steps to...
They most certainly were.
Yeah, exactly.
And the postdoc would be one of them as well.
Right,
and then you can add senior researchers and so on.
Yeah. And then what did I hear? Aspiring PI at some point as well. That's another one. And I'm just wondering, how necessary is it to just cling on to this old system and just use duct tape all the time? Or just, let it go and come up with something better, because the people that are in the system, they are obviously smart.
Yeah.
So there should be some type of way. And when you mentioned Bell Labs and NASA, and then I'm thinking, okay, these are excellent research departments, excellent, and where I would say theoretical and applied work are mixed. Is there something we can get from them?
I would say yes.
And how did they normally? Because I don't know. How did they normally structure that type of work?
Well, I admit I don't know myself how these structure, but there are new examples of these kinds of things. So one thing I would say is that these types of organizations, unlike academia, I think are better able to define their mission and their vision and their values, which is something that you really, really get from looking at it into an MBA program. So if you have, and that's something that research can think about, right? So if you think of a typical country, the country as and this is very interesting for me, is a country wants PhDs, right? That's what the evidence shows. So we want PhDs. Why do we want PhDs? Well, for my best guess is because the country knows that in the future there's artificial intelligence coming, there's automation, labor is expensive in the Western world. So manufacturing is changing, farming is changing. So we're moving to a knowledge economy, and generating PhDs seems like a really good bet for a knowledge economy, right? So that means that a country is interested in creating knowledgeable people. It's not so interested, as far as I can tell, in supporting an older academic model so that everybody can become assistant, associate, and professor because they like to, right? So I think that's something that we as more junior scientists need to understand, is that we can't, the purpose of giving us a PhD is not so that we can all have our dream jobs according to an academic model. That's not the point, right? Then the idea would be is that these creative people can move in different directions, right? So they can move towards industry, they can move towards startups, some can stay in academia, and hopefully, as you say, maybe these creative people will create new organizations potentially. So Bell Labs, NASA, these clearly are places that are unified around some sort of common topic. But I would assume, well, certainly in the case of NASA, it was, when I think of NASA, I think of Kennedy's mission. We're putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade, right? So academia doesn't have that, right? No. And one of the things you can think about is if there's a country that has Netherlands or Canada or something, there's something, there's in the 10s to 20s of large academic research institutes. They each have hospitals. They each have engineering schools. They each have these kinds of things. They have to serve the country. They have to also serve the region. But they don't necessarily have to serve only a academic model, right? So you can, I would say, in the future, I imagine there will be, and I hope there is, more dedicated research institutes around a specific topic, for instance. More ways of saying, what does this region need? What do we need to focus on? This kind of thing, and it's not a replacement of the academic system. It's an addition to the academic system. It's a separate way of doing research. Yeah, and I think that's I could see that being the larger goal of a country, right? Which is why they generate PhD students, which is why they have grants now to collaborate with industry, which is why they also have grants for startups, right? And they're moving their money into different directions besides supporting everyone to become traditional professors. Right. And I mean, yeah, I agree with you. It's not necessarily a replacement of the system. It's maybe even an addition to provide more focus, a bit more streamlining. A bit more streamlining. Which is, I mean, when you have the MPI here next to the Donders, and that's one, okay, I don't want to say anything wrong, but most people I know there study psycholinguistics. Yeah. So that's already one Max Planck Institute saying, okay, this Max Planck Institute is focusing on psycholinguistics / linguistics only, which I already find very streamlined. Otherwise, you just have an institute, how it normally goes, you have an institute where each lab just focuses on their own stuff, completely independent of the other lab. And as a point you mentioned before, most likely each lab then needs to reinvent the wheel constantly in parallel of 10 other labs. Yeah. So you lose time, you waste money, and you're not very streamlined at all. Yeah. So yeah, no, I can see how having these more focused institutes, be very beneficial for the system. Right. And then what you need to do is you need to recognize that there's a bit of a difference, right? So when you create a focused institute, then you would probably have a different culture. You would employ different types of people. You would want to interview the types of people appropriately to work in such an institute, right? So one of the difficulties is, and I think returning to one of your other questions is could we change the academic system as a whole? I think that would be difficult to change, right? It's really difficult to change a culture, right? You can create a new organization that might have a new culture. You can, of course, as a new wave of people come in, the culture can gradually change. So one advantage of academia is I think it is difficult to abruptly change a culture. It always is. But because the cycle is fairly fluid in academia, especially at the younger age, you can see, every 5 to 10 years, the attitude of the PhD students changes, right? I mean, it does change, right? So because you have a cycle of people coming through, right? So as those people come in and start changing the culture a little bit, as new managers and new more senior professors get into the system over time, I think things do gradually change. And an example, I mean, like I said, I had a senior researcher position, right? So somebody decided that this new position was needed. Exactly. And going back to, I believe, in the 70s when we started seeing more postdocs, somebody had that initiative as well, right? Yeah, you're right. And I mean, okay, I've been a big critic of the academic system since I've been in it and also since I left. But in the defense of the academic system, it's not just
a lot of people compare it to industry and just say, oh yeah, hey, you know, this company changed course, academia can change course. I think like, it's not that simple because in that company, you have a good structure. You have a structure and at least one person at the top who is supposed to be able to say, this is the direction we go.
Yeah. We do not have that.
No, we do not have that.
We're very consensus driven.
Yeah, and you have, and there's so many more things involved in the academic system. It's not, even if you had this one person, I think it still wouldn't make much of a difference because government's involved, funding agencies are involved, universities, individual universities are involved, the researchers are involved, and the publishing process and the journals are also involved. So whatever you try to tweak, all of these parties will be paying very close attention. Yeah. And if you change anything that goes against anyone's incentive of this list, nothing is going to change.
You're absolutely right. So that's why I think this ultimately would have to come from the top. It would also ultimately have to come from a national level, an agenda, someone to say, okay, we're going to change course. The levers that they have right now, I more than anything, are grants, right? So for instance, if the government or the granting agencies say, starting next year, we're now going to fund more of this and less of that. I mean, that has been the biggest levers that I've seen, right?
Yeah.
So if the government agency says, well, we like these individual grants, but we're not going to add to them. We're now going to start adding more international collaboration with developing nations grant, for example. I just made up something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Then people will chase that, right? The issue I still see there is that we still, when they create different types of grants and different types of models, we haven't yet, although it's starting to happen, still when you apply for these grants, you're often describing the PhD student and postdoc who you're going to hire. Sometimes I'd like to see where is the project manager that you're going to hire?
Right.
And where is the engineer that you're going to hire? Where is the social media person that you're going to hire? Now it's starting to happen. So a few of these grants start to have, who's going to look after project management, who's going to look after social, like there starts to be things like this, right? And so what I am noticing, the gradual change is PhD students and postdocs are starting to, as an alternative, either do more of these tasks or do some of these tasks part-time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in some cases, actually, there are some grants that might ask for, a large consortium grant might have a role of a program manager, and often a former academic trainee is taking that position. Mm-hmm. So it's starting to happen. So that's the way I can kind of see it going. The other thing I think you're absolutely right, is nobody wants to, within this super large system, really take a risk and say, okay, well, we're not going to publish in these types of journals anymore. Well, then to be fair, what if their junior trainees want to still get hired in a traditional academic model? You don't want to do a disservice to them by pushing them in a different direction.
Right.
But I think if you really stand at the top and you look around the world, there are certain places in the world you wouldn't want to mess with. I would say you wouldn't want to mess with Oxford and Cambridge. I mean, they're very old. They've been around. Everyone knows kind of what they represent, and people are driven towards that. But if you're starting a new university in a new region or something like this, maybe your focus shouldn't be to replicate and the existing system, right? So you could be thinking more about what's good for the region, or you could be thinking more about a specific type of research that you're going to do, mm-hmm. and this kind of thing. So I used to also see a bit of that too. Like there are institutes of technology being built now,
right?
And there are universities now have accelerators and incubators and these kinds of, when they're starting from scratch, some of them can start to think, all right, so now we're going to build it a little bit differently with kind of a different focus. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So now that you mentioned also incubators and accelerators, okay, so I want to talk about that a little bit later. One thing you mentioned is, so when you start a new university, you shouldn't maybe replicate what there is now. And you mentioned, okay, you don't want to mess with Oxford or Cambridge. What I found interesting was during my PhD time at the Donders, we had what was this? This was some type of quality assessment, research quality assessment or institute assessment itself that took place. And during that week, researchers or senior people within the academic system from Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, or also from United States, I think somebody from Johns Hopkins was there as well. They came to visit the Donders. They had lots of conversations with people to see how the process goes. They looked at the academic output and so on to basically give an assessment of the quality of research, a score, if you will, for the Donders. And I met this one person who, we had a lunch so that these people can also talk to PhD students. And I met this one person who was at Oxford at that moment. So when you are in the academic world, what do you hear? Oxford is like the holy grail. They did their branding properly, I have to say.
Yeah, they do.
They did that well. MIT the same, and Cambridge as well. So when I asked him what he thought about the Donders, he said the infrastructure is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I was confused because he was coming from Oxford. So I just assumed, well, if you think it's amazing here, it must be outstanding at Oxford. How is it there? And he literally told me it's non-existent. So I just had to pause because I didn't understand. If it's non-existent, why would you want to go there in the first place? Well, and he told me, because it's Oxford. So it becomes a type of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which I found a little sad because colleagues of mine, they started PhDs being blinded by this as well, by this brand image. And I have a bit of a revolting nature anyways, but I literally, my perception of these high-level universities changed drastically because I was shocked at how much is pretended or let's say shown to the outside world and how much actually takes place inside. And that discrepancy I just found so big that I was put off strongly.
Well, just to qualify what I would meant by not messing with Oxford and Cambridge, I'm thinking more about their traditional academic culture.
Oh, that's what you mean.
So for instance,
the culture I like.
Exactly. So for instance, like, yes, universities need to so these are universities that pride themselves on academic excellence and excellent research. So of course, if we're talking about magnetic resonance imaging, they should have excellent magnetic resonance imaging infrastructure.
Agreed,
right? If they don't, then they're really ruining who they are. So that would be crazy.
Yeah.
What I mean more is a culture.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you go to these traditional universities that are built around maybe the academic model, right, of postdocs and lecturers and all this kind of thing, have made successes in the past, and it would be really difficult to change a culture there. I think it would be difficult to say starting next year, this university that everyone recognizes as operating in a certain way, what it means to be a reader at Oxford, what it means to be professor of psychology at Oxford, that kind of thing. It would be difficult to mess with that. I mean, they have, but that is their culture. That's their way of doing things.
And they might not need to change at all.
They might not need to change, but of course they need to have proper infrastructure because they still need to deliver good quality science.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But what I was thinking more is not every university in the world, if you think of all the universities in the world, need to say, well, we need to have a professor of this and we need to have a reader doing this. And in order to be here, it means that you do teaching and you also do research and you do it like this, right? That I don't see as necessary.
No, yeah,
I think especially when a new type of research evolves or a new type of societal goal comes, when a problem that hasn't been solved yet really requires a team of people, then you should be focusing more on, okay, how do we, what is our goal and what is our mission? Why do we exist? If we are a new university in a new place, why do we have to replicate a model that's been around for hundreds of years, right? If it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Right. Yeah. And okay, to be fully fair, the limitations that you sometimes get at these, let's say, older established institutes, you need to keep in mind that the campuses are very old. And there is limited space, exactly. And everybody is trying to flock to those places. Yeah. So you start running into problems soon anyhow.
Well, people should also do their research.
They should also do their research, yeah.
So there are certain types of PhD students who belong at Oxford. Yeah. The way they think and the way they behave and the type of questions that they're asking.
Agreed.
And there's certain type of PhD students who should not go to Oxford, right? They're asking different questions. Yeah. They're doing different types of research. Yeah.
Their approach is different.
Their approach is different. Yeah, right. Yeah. That also is important. So don't just be blinded by a brand.
No, exactly.
Also think about really, are you going to fit with where you're going and what you're trying to do there?
Yeah. And when I talk to some people that work at Oxford or Cambridge, because of these limitations of infrastructure that wasn't there, they had to come up with very ingenious ways of how to still do their research properly, which I have to say, very, very impressed with, which went so beyond of what they actually had to research, which opened up a whole new avenue of an approach. Wow. I was, for example, there was a friend of mine that was at UCL, and it was a small lab. They didn't have lots of funding. I also assumed UCL, great infrastructure. I said, no. And when I asked her, how do you do your analysis? She said, I run it on my laptop. And there was fMRI analysis, And I was like, wait, how is that possible? Because at the Donders, we have a cluster, it's just so more people can actually do it properly. And she said, we had to rewrite the code for some libraries to work much more efficiently so the whole thing could run without a problem on my computer. That requires programming knowledge that goes very, very deep. So that which doesn't only benefit them if you think about it. It benefits everyone.
Benefits the scientific community around the world.
Exactly. Now, I don't want to say I don't want to give out the conclusion of just deprive people of stuff and they will solve things. It also doesn't work that way. You need a balance of both. But no, I agree with you. Is that you should, as a PhD student or postdoc, whenever you look for a position, it also needs to fit you.
Yes.
You shouldn't be just driven by, this sounds like a cool project. Yeah. Because that's not the only thing important here.
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's definitely interesting. And before you mentioned other types of new avenues that are now being, how can I say, not discovered, explored. Explored, that being, for example, having accelerators or incubators within universities themselves. Now that shift also, do you think that shift came because of interest from the universities to go that route, or because of the grants? You mentioned them being a very strong lever from the government, the grants demanding from academia or grant applications to have more collaboration with industry?
It's both.
It's both.
So one, in answer to the first question, not every university thinks this way. But I was in Israel last week visiting universities there about their entrepreneurial and spin-off innovation cultures. One obvious thing is that universities need income. They need money to function. And they realize that spinning things out and licensing things are a way to get that income, right? So there is an obvious reason, and an obvious reason is that universities know that research, especially tech and biomedical research, can lead to major innovations that can generate a lot of revenues, and they shouldn't just sit on the shelf, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is universities also might be nudged by the government to say, listen, part of your mission is good research, good education, and to have an impact on society. So if a new product is created that benefits someone, that's good. If new jobs are created in your region or in the country that create that product and that can create, employed people that contribute to the tax base, all this kind of stuff, that's also good. And if it attracts immigrants and other knowledge base, that's good, right? And then also just, even if it's not about making money, okay, one of your missions is to not just be in the ivory tower, but that what you're actually doing should lead to society. So even if it's not going to be for profit, there's still people that should benefit from your research, right? And so we need not just incubators and accelerators to generate money, but you need this kind of culture of being able to get research out into something that is useful in society, right? Mm-hmm. Now, then the third way is there are sometimes grants. So the grants might say, this grant requires you to mention how this is going to be used in society, and you will be evaluated on the case that you can make for how this to be used in society. So then we're not exactly talking about incubators and accelerators per se, but we are talking about, and they probably would be connected to those incubators and accelerators, but some sort of technology transfer office or some sort of unit of people on the campus who are good at helping you get your research into something that society can use, right? And since you're talking about user UX design, I mean, this is the kind of thing, right? So in other words, okay, so you've made this super creative, expensive thing, but no one can use this. How can you make this so someone would use this, right? And how are you going to reach the patients, for instance, that might benefit from this, right? So now you're talking about platforms, and you're talking about social media, and you're talking about conferences, and you're talking about all these kinds of things. Right. So I put that kind of also in this part of the university as well.
But okay, then a bit more. Okay, I have to admit, this was a philosophical clash I had with my peers, because when we started, I've been often asked, like, hey, you patent things, and how does it go with patents? And in my research, I also found out you own a patent as well. You hold one.
I was a co-applicant as a PhD student.
Yeah. But that's pretty cool. Yeah. That's we might talk about that in a little bit. But what I noticed was that I often heard from the tech transfer people the argument of, we need to patent what you made, and only then we can give it out. And I'm wondering, because as soon as you patent something, you as the university are the official owner. And this becomes a little bit of a catch-22. I realize this. But I see it like this. Your research is funded by taxpayer money.
Yep.
You as a university exist based on taxpayer money.
Yes.
So whatever you create should not be owned by you. It should be owned by everyone. It should be made publicly available, and that's the separate part of now the publishing and the paywalls when it comes to that. But it should be made, if you will, open source for everyone to use if they wish to do so. And when you have a patent, you basically create another wall of, another hurdle of getting that done. And then I heard often the argument, but you need to protect your ideas and et cetera, et cetera. And then you need to have this into a startup to then actually bring it out. Now, I normally argue is the money didn't come from you. The money wasn't generated by you. Why should you own this and make money off of it, and not give actually back to society in that sense? What you could do is give everyone the opportunity to build a startup around what you have found out, and you would still do the same thing. And maybe the tech transfer, and that's part what you said, should not focus on patenting these things, but advocating that these things exist, or maybe even fund startups that will use that without a patent involved whatsoever.
They can.
They can.
But one of the issues, I think the most important than issue with this is, and this is something that scientists really forget a lot, is sustainability.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So one of the problems about giving something away is it can often just fall flat in its face and fail, right?
Yeah.
So I have a number of apps on my phone that I can't use anymore because the iOS updated to the newest version and the person who wrote the app hasn't bothered to do it.
Yeah.
So one of the problems with open source is it can often just end up junk, right? Because no one is going to invest the time, money, or effort to keep it going.
But the same thing could happen with patents as well.
Oh yeah, so there's a lot of patents. So I agree. The point is not to say, not to push people towards making patents.
Right.
Like patents should not be the next paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
like we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers on a given topic just thrown up into PubMed.
Right.
Hopefully someone will find something useful out of
Yeah.
it. And we're starting to see that this is not always working. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Same thing is having a whole bunch of patents to just brag that you have a patent or to block people from innovating is a really stupid idea.
Yeah, I agree.
But if the patent allows a startup to be created so that the startup can gain traction, so that the startup can actually make a product that people will buy, so that the startup can employ people, then you need the patent, right? And if the patent is say for industry, the only way they're going to be interested in working with you at all, then you might need a patent. Right. But if you look at it and you say, okay, there's no real point in patenting this because it maybe it can't be patented, or just the amount of money that we'd have to put into this patent would
strategically it makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
Yeah.
Maybe then what you would say instead is we are instead then interested in a partnership. We're instead interested in the university and scientists being able to, now you're saying kind of more for the good of society using taxpayer money.
Right.
This is where UX design would come in.
Yeah.
To be able to say, okay, well, the university thinks that this research is really good. People can use it, but now we need people to be aware of it, and we need to get people using it so that we can iron out all the bugs and the kinks.
Right.
And we can maybe think that maybe we scientists have thought that this is useful, but society doesn't actually care about this at all.
Yeah.
But they care about something else that we could easily tweak and make into something, right? And so, but even that then, again, never forget scientists are people. They've got families to support and mortgages and whatever, rents to pay. Yeah. So eventually it can't just be volunteer and it can't just be for free.
Right.
So somewhere there needs to be a grant or a private donation or a foundation or revenues generated from a business, because otherwise how are the competent people going to make a living doing this, right? And that's the one difficulty with pure open source and pure volunteer good for society that you can't just ignore.
No, I agree with you. These things definitely need to coexist, because if you don't own a house, you need to pay rent and buy food minimum. And I find it a little unfair to expect of someone who went to normal school and then basically spent almost 10 years of their life to then also finish a PhD and then to work for free.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to.
Yeah.
Well, I find it actually rude to assume that.
So then of course those people will not do it. They will have no incentive, right? So they'll chase research grants if they're a researcher and do what's required for research grants, and they'll teach because if they're employed to teach, or they will leave and get scooped up by industry anyway, or something like that, right? So then exactly. No, like doing something for free.
It's dangerous.
Is dangerous.
It's definitely dangerous.
It usually, what I see is these free things. And
it's unsustainable.
They're there. Yeah, exactly. They're not sustainable. They're there for a year and then they go away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's just these. I like to call them sometimes just vanity metrics. Yep. These are still just counted as, oh, look, we did this. Look, we did this. Yeah. Oh, where is it now? We don't know. Well, so it doesn't really count, in my opinion. No, I agree with you. These need to be. It needs to be definitely thought about where the flow of the economic engine comes in. And I'm not saying it all needs to be 100% for profit, but there needs to be an influx of money and some type of financial compensation to pay people to just live. And that's just how currently the economy works.
Yeah, exactly.
But then again, I've seen a lot of open source models, and I was surprised about this myself. I've seen, for example, when it comes to platforms where you can organize your projects and work with other people together. I've seen, of course, paid versions. What do you have? Slack, Asana, others as well, Trello, I think. I don't want to say anything wrong. Sorry for the ones I didn't mention. Those are paid services. And then you have the open source versions, which you can host yourself. And then it's for free. But if you don't want to host it yourself, you don't have to. And then there is a company that basically took the open source code and built a service around it.
And that's
very
they
successful.
charge for that, right?
And they charge for that. But they only, basically what they charge for is they don't charge for, look, we invented this thing, which they haven't. But they say, look, we can understand that open source sometimes seems a little messy because you don't know who did what and what's happening here. And then something gets pulled, something gets pushed, you merge code. You don't have to worry about all of those things. Just sign up to us. We take care of this additional step of maintenance. And that's then what they get paid for.
That's fine. That's a great business model.
I think so too.
So open source, you're right. So open source, well, there's freemium. So we should talk about that. So first off, there's freemium, right?
Freemium,
so freemium and the example just you gave, these are possible, right? So you can for people, that is a good way, because now, well, there's a couple of things. There's corporate social responsibility is now a big thing. Good. It also fits with the younger generation. So people now are willing to, maybe work for less money or be less driven for making a profit if they feel good about what they do and they're excited to get out and contribute, get up in the morning and contribute to society. So it does kind of work.
I think it's important. It's also important, right?
So some of these models make sense when you have different tiers of customers, right? Those who get it for free and those who are willing to pay for something more premium, right? And so I think, that's where it can work as a business model. And I think in general, pure open source that I can think of good ones, they can work as in academia, again, if say junior people are incentivized to keep it going. So people who are, I can think of examples like many of the open source tools we use for neuroimaging. They rely on a new PhD student or postdoc who wants to do research in neuroimaging, probably more on the data science and computational side. Part of their training and what they can use to build their career off of is contribution to this open source technology platform that people around the world are using. Right. And then it can be maintained. And these are examples. The Donders has a great one, field trip analysis for EEG. That's an
great
example, right?
Oh, it's perfect.
But still, field trip could not exist if there was not a few scientists who, like Robert Ostenfeld and Jan Matthias Schroeffelin, sorry, I'm saying these names wrong as a Canadian, who didn't take the lead to keep it going. Right. So this is these are examples where it can work. I think.
And then you can. So I don't actually know if this. I've never attended a toolkit, I have to admit, but the Donders offers toolkits.
Right, you can make you can charge some money and you can charge for the toolkit, and that helps sustain it. And that's the key thing is sometimes these most of in a pure in a nonprofit organization, you still have to pay for it. And what you're really paying for is to keep it going. Which means the infrastructure and the personnel.
Exactly. It's not meant that you pay for that company to then grow. That would be then the profit part that needs to come in. It's literally just pay us a little bit so that we can keep on offering this.
Shareholders are not making money.
Exactly. Well, there are no shareholders.
There's no shareholders. That's not the idea. You're not doing this for the shareholder. You're doing this to keep it going. And people who are keeping it going are making it it's just part of their living.
Now, I find this interesting because I've met a few people within academia where, like Robert, with Field Trip, where I heard of Field Trip before. I was exposed to it before. Then I was at the Donders and I didn't even know that it originated from the Donders. And then I met Robert and we talked a little bit, and so the drive or his well, maybe I should just say vision that he had for this was his strong drive to keep this going forward.
Yep.
And I think this goes back to what we mentioned before, that you need just one person at the top that just says, that's the way we go. We go that direction, and then the people around that get attracted to this type of vision, they come on board and help out. Yeah. And that's then maybe also in line with the corporate social responsibility aspect of, okay, in that vision, it becomes very clear of how society, or in this case, maybe just academia, still part of society, I might say, can benefit from this. But this part, I find very entrepreneurial as well. And it is often not something that within the academic system is, personally, maybe it's just a personal thing for me, is reflected upon a lot. Yeah. Because you are, in essence, in most of your trajectory, at least in the current way it's been done, a solitary worker. You work on your project, you work with your professor together, but you are working on your project. You are supposed to be calling the shots, you giving the direction and so on. But it sounds to me like an entrepreneur. Just, okay, one thing is research, entrepreneur might be more industry, but philosophically sounds very similar to me. Yeah. Do you think PhD students, or also later on within the postdoc period, would benefit from, well, entrepreneurial training?
Absolutely. So I think it's, and some places are, so I mentioned I was in Israel last week. All the universities we went to there are starting to do this. So they're starting to say, you know, in the last few years anyway, we're going to have courses where we're going to train PhD students specifically, and postdocs as well. So some of the more transient, non-academic trajectory, not non-permanent faculty kind of thing in entrepreneurial thinking. Right now, again, the hope with this is towards things like startups and spin-offs and being able to license technology and so on. But as you say, it's also has a societal benefit to it, is that they can start thinking about how to make something for society out of their research. There's a couple of things that I find interesting about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial thinking, and also the concept of the intrapreneur that some people talk about. Yeah. So one difficulty with entrepreneurship is whether you see it as, you know, the creative creating something that doesn't exist with kind of the end user or the market in mind, finding a niche, finding something new, being able to innovate and that kind of stuff, or if you see it as the economic side of the entrepreneur that creates a business model out of nothing and takes personal risk, right? And sometimes, you know, that an entrepreneur can mean different things to people, right? Sure. So I think what you're talking about is more the entrepreneurial thinking, which could also be an intrapreneur. Yeah. So it could also just be that the organization has a culture, or people working within the organization, at least maybe in some division of that organization, who are a bit more market focused and a bit more really scouting needs, and at the same time also thinking about, you know, hey, what solution can I come up with that fills of a need in a void where there's nothing yet, right? And that I think we definitely need more of, right? And I think if you train people in the thinking, then you can also get the type that are going to go off and take the risk and create their own business, right?
Right, yeah. Right. No, I think, and this actually leads me to another. Another listener asked me if I could ask you this question, but you basically already answered it. It's that so postdocs and PhDs are often not trained to also consider non-academic skills, right? But basically, if they were to get this entrepreneurship training, they would. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the economic aspect of creating a new business model. They could go down that route, but they don't have to.
Right.
And I think not only is this good for learning, well, maybe just some basics about management and process structure and so on, but also about how you convince people, how you need to communicate. Sale or selling is such a, well, I have to say, dirty term in the academic environment. I don't see it that way at all. I just see it as you need to learn how to communicate. If you communicate badly, nobody is going to get behind your ideas. Doesn't necessarily make your ideas bad, but what you say and how you say it is important. And you are learning when you're doing entrepreneurship, you learn this very quickly. Is that often what you know, especially when you come from academia, is not normal to know about. And in your little bubble, and I have to admit that this happened for me as well, is that all my colleagues, they obviously knew all these complicated concepts. You went to university forever. So this was just normal to say one word, which was a concept, but to understand this concept, you need to go to university for just 2 years. And then just going outside in the world and just assuming, oh, everybody knows this, because at work I can normally talk about this. And only then it becomes clear, oh, I'm in this bubble. And I think this is very critical to understand this, that you, I'm not saying to understand that you are in a bubble, but to be able to have a reference point of where you fit in to society and when it comes to different levels. When it comes to education, when it comes to concepts, when it comes to understanding, when it comes to your skills, which while you are in the academic system, don't seem that great because everyone has them. And you only get a reality check when you talk to someone else, only then. And I found that learning about entrepreneurship, I was forced to do so. I was forced to be confronted with these things, which then also helped me to actually, just as in that question, to learn non-academic skills, which are super important, I think, when you, if you want to continue down the academic career path. But also if you don't, I think that's even more important then, because when you are at a company, you are at a job interview, and they ask you about your skills, what you think you're good at, what you're bad at. Now you know, because you got the reality check. Because otherwise, I mean, everybody is constantly making their own projects, in charge of the timeline of research design, data collection, data analysis, paper writing, publishing, etc., etc. That requires a lot of time management skills, especially when you start to collaborate with multiple universities in it. But because there is not so much focus in the academic system on the skill of time management, they all say you need it, but nobody ever says, oh, I'm very good at time management. But in industry, they would want to hear that. But in academia, you would never say that. And that's, I think, where this entrepreneurial training can come in so handy and be very important, actually, for the development.
Well, I think it and other types of training too.
What other types of training?
For instance, so one of the things that I would find, I don't have an answer to this yet. So should every PhD student get trained in entrepreneurship and in project management and in communication and in organizational management? You could start thinking of things that they could be trained in and exposed to, coordination, this kind of thing, in their PhD, or maybe what it should be, at least at the start, is that there's an attitude saying, okay, you should, for your own benefit, build up your non-academic skills, right? You probably won't have time to do all of these things in addition to your research, in addition to the things that you do have to do still to get a PhD degree. Okay? But we're really going to make sure that we as an institute or the department or wherever you're working value these non-academic skills. You will get some time to do them. You can maybe have some sort of, I don't know, few weeks when you come here to shop around and see what's out there. And then if you want to learn about some of them, like entrepreneurship, then yes, this is for you, right? But maybe not every PhD student gets a course in entrepreneurship.
No,
maybe.
No.
But the alternative would be is that they know it exists. And some of them do. And some of them also get training in something else, right? Right. So that's also But I do see your point that there are certain universal things that generally are not covered in the academic world, but seem to be covered outside of academia, such as time management, being able to talk to a customer, being able to give a good elevator pitch, these kinds of things.
These kinds of things.
So there are some very general things that that probably would benefit everybody.
Yeah, but no, I agree with you. It should be like a buffet of possibilities of courses that you can follow.
And if you look around, they do exist. Radboud University does have these courses, but it just may be that every student, because of what they're told by their supervisor, their daily supervisor, their department or whatever, if they're told, well, actually, don't worry about courses. You're here to do research. Then that particular person is lost from that. Yeah. So it really also has to be a faculty-wide culture. Anyway.
Exactly.
This is important. Part. We value it. Everybody gets to do this. And then it's not that your supervisor overrides this. Yeah. Or it's not that your daily supervisor tells you it's not important or something like this, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, and this is actually, now that you talk about the supervisor, what I noticed is that, I mean, I don't want to name any names. It's just something that I noticed in general, not only in the Netherlands, just with anyone I interacted with in the academic community, is that I've noticed that a lot of PIs, so principal investigators, the professors that start to have their own lab, they are so used to doing their own research that now they would actually have to let go, because now their PhD students and postdocs should actually do it. They are actually more in a manager position, but they don't let go and they turn into micromanagers, which well, basically to the detriment of their PhD students and postdocs. Yeah. And
not always though. Not all
of them do.
Many are very the opposite, hands off completely.
And that's good. Well, I think it can go multiple ways. Yeah. If you are a micromanager, you need the type of people in your lab that are okay with that.
You're correct.
That are okay with that. But I've not seen often in the hiring process that being considered at all. It's more of this is a smart person, great resume, hire as a PhD student. Not so much, or do they get along with people in a lab? Yes, great, hired. Not so much about, hey, how do you approach your work? Do you work like that? No, I've rarely seen that happening. Or with a hands-off approach, then you need the people that can work very independently and can come to you, or where they will come to me if they have questions, because some also don't. Yeah. And I was wondering, do you think that maybe PIs need some, or well, maybe this actually solves it when they are getting some entrepreneurship training already early on, that later on they realize, okay, now I'm a bit more senior. I'm now more of a manager. I need to get the grants in. I'm not sitting in the lab anymore. I need to let go a little bit. I need to think of a structure. Do you think there could be a solution to that problem?
Well, I think so. If you're asking, do I think people who are becoming PIs should have management training or should have entrepreneurship training? Yes, I absolutely do. Yeah. I think it's partly because, again, it comes down to an individual situation.
Of course.
So when I've been interviewed by people, it has been clear that they've thought about this. Yeah. They've thought, okay, look, this is how big my lab is. This is how I tend to run things. Are you okay doing it like this, right? Because I'm trying to find a fit for both of us, right? And I do the same thing. If we bring in a PhD student or master's student, I'm definitely, asking these questions myself. I want to know how they work, and are we going to, and like, is it going to work, and this kind of thing, right? I think though, for people who are not so reflective, right? So I realized when I did the MBA that not everybody is like this, even in the MBA program. So I was very interested in organizational behavior. Some people in the program less so, right? So I think if you're naturally the type who finds this stuff valuable and is really thinking about, how am I going to work with these people? What's the team going to be like? Is this going to work? Then you might naturally do it anyway. If this is a blind spot for you, that this is where some management training would be beneficial, at least that you say, I never thought this would be important. Okay, now I'm going to pay attention to this, especially if I've been shown what the consequences of this are. And now people eventually figure it out. So it's probably, for the older professor that's already on their 7th or 8th PhD student or something like this, they've probably figured it out. But yeah, for the person having their very first PhD student, if they haven't yet thought about this, and this is a blind spot for them, then it is good for them to have the training to be able to know this, this is important, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it would be beneficial to everyone involved to, it's always good to find a match. It's always good to find a match. It's always more important. And I thought this was very interesting when I was about to start my PhD. I almost finished the master's and was thinking about starting it. I asked my former supervisor about his career path and if he has some tips that I should take into consideration doing a PhD or where to do a PhD in general. And he basically said, okay, there are 3 important things, the 3 most important things. And I was like, okay. So I took my notepad out and I was ready to write. And he said, okay, number 1, do you get along with your supervisor? Number 2, do you get along with your supervisor? Oh, okay. And number 3, do you get along with your supervisor? And I was confused because I can see why that's nice, but isn't the project more important? Yeah. And he said, no, it's not. Because if you get along with your supervisor, it almost doesn't matter what was written in the grant proposal. You can almost do whatever you want. But if you don't get along with your supervisor,
it's hell.
He basically said, I can tell you for sure, it doesn't matter what was written in the grant proposal. You won't be able to do any of it just because you won't be able to do any type of work. Yeah. And this was a big eye-opener for me because when you're about to finish your master's, at least that's how it was for me, it was all about where are you going to do your PhD? Oh, I'm going to go to Oxford. I'm going to go to Cambridge. I'm going to work in this lab. I'm going to work in that. It was basically name dropping. Yeah. Which, if you are in that state, is basically all you can rely on because you're so early on. You barely know anyone. So you can just go based on the advertisements. So that he told me this really was, okay, I need to dig a little deeper than just what's written on a website. Yeah. And it also helped me to figure out if I go to an interview, what types of questions I need to ask and not just what types of questions I need to be prepared to answer. Yeah, it's not at all. Yeah. At the same time, it's also, that was at least my experience, is that when you come prepared with questions for the counterparty, 95% of the time, they don't expect you to ask anything.
Yeah, and they do all the talking.
Exactly. Yeah. And you get all the information, which is so much more important to help you make a good decision. Because I think that's in the end to find that fit. Because nobody is happy. Also, your supervisor who likes to work in a different way isn't happy when the relationship isn't good. So it's because often we hear from the PhDs, my supervisor. I can tell you, your supervisor isn't pleased about that either. So it's a two-way street. Yeah. And I also understand that you're on a shorter end of the stick, unfortunately. Yeah, do you say it like that?
Short end of the stick. Yeah, You've got the short end of the stick.
You got the short end of the stick because you are hierarchically seen lower. But from my perception, that's only in your head. At least in the Netherlands,
it's a flat culture.
Yeah,
I have tell your supervisor whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying be rude or anything, but when you open up about difficulties you have in a lab and ask for your supervisor's time to talk about this in private, they are willing to listen, just like any other human being would be. And that solved for a lot of my friends a lot of problems by just doing that. And not walking in there with a battle plan or something, just be open, and respectful. Because otherwise, as soon as you accuse people, they get defensive immediately, no matter if you have a good point or not. But no, that's I agree with you. Management skills are important at that higher stage. Not only to manage your own lab, I would say, But now you're at such a high level, you have now a political game to play as well. And if you don't know about these things, again, you would, without the training, you just have to deal with it while it presents itself to you. But that might not be the most efficient way to go about it.
I think one thing this previous what we're talking about right now brings us back to kind of an important one, and that is if someone outside of academia was listening to this conversation now,
right?
I imagine, this is my guess, is they would be asking the question, one, what is the point of the PhD, right? So in other words, this person's getting a PhD. Are they getting a PhD just to get the degree? Are they getting a PhD to do research for society? Is that why they're doing it? Are they getting a PhD to launch their career, right? And why is this person, in a program at a university getting a degree, but ultimately the relationship with one person matters the most? I mean, it's a kind of an interesting question, right? So it's an interesting question that gets us back to kind of the academic system as being the system.
I agree.
So one of the difficulties, of course, would be is if you take the view that the point of having PhDs is to create people to go into the knowledgeable people to contribute to society who have analytical skills and are proactive and creative and so on. Then what should matter the most would be the program and the department and what we're training you to do and what we're exposing you so you can be this person, right? And then in that case, the supervisor becomes kind of the secondary thing. So the supervisor is the person who's going to guide you scientifically and is going to be kind of like your mentor, right? If you look at it like, well, no, the point of a scientist is to scientist being the term scientist that is the academic job, is to build a lab and train future scientists. Then you're talking about this supervisor-student relationship that's almost completely independent of society as the goal, or independent of the program. Right. And that's one of the things that's always difficult, is because the supervisor in his or her position has their goals for research as well as climbing the academic ladder.
Sure.
So they can if they don't ultimately share in the vision about what the PhD is for, they can see this as, why does this matter, right? What matters is I'm taking this person. I'm ultimately in charge of what I consider good science and a good student and all this kind of stuff, right? And so when I hear about entrepreneurial training and I hear about soft skills and all this kind of stuff, this person could say, I don't want this. Right? It's not their focus. I want them in the lab. Or something like this. And I think so. My personal opinion is that the what society wants from the PhD is now in the modern times what needs to be focused on, right? So even if there's an excellent supervisor and a good relationship, there still needs to be something bigger than that, because you could have a great relationship of PhD and supervisor, but in the end, it could actually not be beneficial for that person's career.
Sure.
Right. They could love their time and it could be excellent, but they could completely not learn the skills that are going to be useful to them later. Right.
So have no output
or something like this. Right. So it's always a difficult topic. Right.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, someone outside of academia, I'd be really interesting if what they would think. They would probably, it's a foreign structure to them. That in a way they'd probably be wondering why does this exist and what's the ultimate purpose of some of this, right?
And I also find it funny whenever I hear people from industry coming and talking to scientists about how to come from science into industry. I find it quite funny to see how they say and insist the PhD counts for nothing. It's So I don't necessarily, and I often hear now, I've heard this so often that I also hear scientists now believing that It's like,
that's can be discouraging. You don't want that.
No, you don't want that at all. And I started to then debate friends and former colleagues on this, not because I wanted to be right, but because I just thought that was horrendous. You developed so many skills during your PhD, and not seeing or counting that as a type of work experience is. Yeah, I find that incredibly unfair.
I think PhD students should ultimately, from this, they should almost start writing a non-academic resume right from their start, and in that top section where you list in general your skills or what you're good at, start putting them down. As you've given your excellent presentation, as you've solved the first data science problem, as you've completed a complete data set, as you've gotten good teaching reviews or whatever, start adding this, right? Keep track of all the things that you are doing that are not directly related to the document at the end. Right?
Because I also, not that I want to blame industry now on this only, I very often saw friends of mine or other PhDs that finished that PhD walk into certain meetings very entitled.
Yeah,
and
that's
bad. That doesn't only hold for PhDs. I find personally an entitled attitude is 99% of the time counterproductive, because basically you just assume you deserve this without having shown why. And when you sit in a job interview like this, no one is going to hire you with that type of attitude. You're not going to make for a good team player. You're not going to develop any further because you think you just deserve it. And by writing these things down, as you mentioned, I think you then also train automatically in that meeting that you then have, or in that interview, to communicate what you actually learned and did during your PhD. Because these other entities, they have no idea. Honestly, I was at the Donders while I was doing my master's. I had no idea what a PhD entailed until I actually did it. And I think it's upon the person who did it to communicate this properly. It's they have the experience, the knowledge. The other people, they say this doesn't count at all. They obviously don't have that knowledge, otherwise they wouldn't make that claim. So now it's up to you to convince them that it does count. And often there, I see the cut happening. They just like, oh my God, they said this, and then they just stop talking. It's like, so then I asked them, what did you say then? Nothing. No, this was an invitation for you to not defend yourself, but to explain.
At the very least, you can treat your PhD as a portfolio that you're building up. Right?
Yes.
So that you're able to say, okay, like this is what my PhD entitled me, or not entitled. So this is what my PhD entailed. This is what it entailed. This is what I was doing, right? And I think that ultimately is where you're going with a PhD if you're thinking in terms of the benefit of society and so on, right? Because this is why, because you could say maybe we don't need PhDs really. Why do we have all these new PhD programs? Why are we encouraging people to get PhDs and stuff? And I ultimately think it's because it is one of many valuable degrees, apprenticeships, trainings, these kinds of things to create a something for the new knowledge-based economy.
I agree. So I have a few more questions for you. Let's see how far we go, because I don't want to take too much more of your time. What I would like your opinion on this. So the duration of a PhD is on average across sectors about 5 years. So this number is about roughly constant in the Netherlands since 2001. Now I am wondering if this is so well known since it's 2018 years, how come still only 4-year contracts are given out?
Oh yeah, no, that's an issue. That is something unique to a funding model of a country. So there are advantages and disadvantages. So in North America, it's not as set.
No, okay.
It is not a 4-year job. It is not a 4-year job with a profile set by the organization, the national organization, with different salary steps. It's not as much like that. It is much more variable. It is more when your committee of determine that you've done enough, right? And a disadvantage of that way is that people can go around for many, many years in kind of loops where something's not working, and there's not really an incentive to just say, hey, you're coming up on this deadline. We need to get this done, right?
Right.
So there is a disadvantage of that, right? But one advantage of that is it's more flexible.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So to me, if every PhD project takes about 4 or 5 years or longer, and you're only funding them for 4, you need to then adjust the expectations, right? One reason that hasn't happened is, again, I think the PhD students themselves and their supervisor may be convinced that extra amount of time is necessary for the project or for their own career goals. So it may not always be that a supervisor or a supervisory team is saying to the PhD student, you're not done.
Right.
It may be that the PhD student themselves is still wanting to continue in the traditional academic path, meaning that they want to do a postdoc at a good place, meaning that they need more papers and all this kind of stuff. So it might be voluntary that they're working longer than the 4 years. Right. But you definitely want to make sure, and I'm happy to say that the Donders is concerned about this. Okay. And they are really making sure now that this is not this isn't some default thing. Like it's not people are not to be walking around saying, oh, I've got to prepare for this final year of unemployment because I know it's going to take 5 years, but they're only going to pay me for 4. So I'm just going to be prepared for this final year of unemployment. And especially in the Netherlands, my understanding is that technically that's illegal. Right. It actually is illegal. Yeah. Right. And if I was, if you're a taxpayer, you shouldn't want this.
No, you shouldn't want this at all.
You shouldn't want the social support system paying for a PhD student to take extra time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is a concern about this, right? Okay. And I think the balance is you want it to be made sure that the expectation is not that this is going to last longer than 4 years. But at the same time, for the benefit of the individual student, plus the professor and everybody else involved on the science team, you don't want to force someone to retire before they're ready to go.
Of course not. I mean, that also makes no sense.
That also makes no sense.
No.
So at the very least, there is a tension here to say, no, we're going to make sure that we're not. The goal is not to have people work for free in this 5th year, right? So there should be more planning, should be more discussions with the supervisor and the daily supervisor all along with the thesis committee to be able to say, is this actually feasible in 4 years?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because this illegal part that you just mentioned, I've seen this being, unfortunately, a widespread common practice of, your contract's finished. Well, you do have 4 months anyway, right? Well, what do you mean 4 months? Well, you get 4 months of unemployment benefits, 1 month for each year you got paid during your PhD.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically just work through then.
Yeah.
And but having that planned in already, so that didn't happen to me.
No.
But so to anyone listening, you need to remember that when you do your PhD that you're in charge. Yeah. And you need to make clear that is not what you are going to do. Yeah. Because this is still, when you do it, you also need to, you cannot just point somewhere else saying, oh, they made me do it. You are complicit in this. Yeah. So just I don't want to blame just the supervisors here on this.
It's part of the discussion, right?
Exactly.
So it's part of saying, so we do this with my own students, right?
Yeah,
it's just more,
it's important to discuss it.
If we're collecting data at this rate, then this is not going to be completed in 4 years.
Yeah.
So that means we cannot expect the PhD student to analyze the full data set, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Or the PhD student will do a different question on the data set, something like this, right?
Yeah.
So, or we need to think about how we can hire the person as a postdoc afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. Something like this.
Something like this.
Right.
Exactly.
So that dialogue has to happen.
Exactly. And and I find it important that you say dialogue.
It's a dialogue.
It's a dialogue. Yeah? And then you do your PhD student or postdoc, it's still a dialogue. It's don't think you have to follow someone blindly. And very often I noticed supervisors actually appreciate it when you take charge.
Yeah.
They like that a lot because it takes work off their plate. It's great. Okay. How much more time do you have?
You have a few more questions.
I have a few more questions, but I just want to focus on 2 more.
Okay.
And let's see if I can. I think they are intertwined, but let's see if we can spread them out, which is the one part where I think academia has a problem because they say you are very free, almost sounds like there is no bottom line, yet you have the publish or perish.
Yeah.
Motivator or let's say force. And at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, so I don't know if this problem holds in other areas as well, but in social sciences, psychology, neuroscience as well, we are going through a big replication crisis.
Yeah.
Which, that's very bad for science in general. And I'm wondering, how do you think these two things work together, or maybe create each other?
In an answer, they don't.
They don't.
So I actually did a lot of my MBA projects on this type of thing.
Oh, okay,
right?
tell me.
So one of the difficulties for an organization is the idea of there's competing values, right? So if you are a very fly by the seat of your pants entrepreneurial organization, you want to be constantly moving, doing new things. That comes out of as a consequence of, say, being a controlled place, a place with procedures, a place with policies and this kind of things, right?
Yes.
So likewise, if you're very, very competitive and market focused, if you want to say, listen, we Institute X, we care about papers. This is what we're about. Okay? Yeah. We are about papers, and if it's not likely to have an impact above 8, this impact factor score, we're not doing it. Yeah. Right? If the institute wanted to run like that, then what you should see is a very competitive culture where you pilot some things, you look at your data and you say, this data is garbage, I'm not continuing. Yeah. Right? And you're just very competitive focused, right? You can't have that culture, but at the same time worry about a replication crisis.
Oh yeah, of course.
Or at the same time worry about the file drawer effect. Yeah. That's another one where people all around the world spend their time trying to answer the same question. It doesn't look sexy enough, so they bury it. Yeah. Right? So at the very least, you have to recognize that your organization cannot exist in all of those places at once. Sure. And if it tries to, then it's just going to be a disaster. Yeah. Right. And everybody's going to be really frustrated because they're told one thing by their boss one day, one thing by their boss the other day. They never know what the priority is, and it can be a real disaster. Right. Now there are kinds of ways that you can. You could have different divisions within the organization, right? Of course, like an accounting department should behave culturally different than the entrepreneurial spin-off department, right? Yeah, so industry recognizes this. There are different departments, right? And some industries can have all of these things going on at once. But the important thing is that you, the employee, and your manager, and what the culture has to fit, right? And it can't be trying to be many places at once. You can't say one thing and do another, right? And that's so I would say that like the universities need to say, if they really value and they care about a replication crisis, then they need to reward people for doing replication studies, right? Agreed. They need to have meetings and dialogues where they say, we're pre-registering what we're doing. We're going to see this project through to this point where this is the analysis we're committing to do, and this is what we're going to do. And the people who do that then cannot, in say their performance evaluation, be asked about impact of the paper. Impossible. Yeah. Right. Now, if you want to be really competitive and you want to be very focused, then you have to live with the file drawer effect. Yeah. You have to live with pilots that are just going to be shelved if it doesn't look nice. right? And you just have to say, this is what we're about. We're going to, and to be honest, like if you're in entrepreneurship, like if you're doing the lean startup, nobody's continuing the thing that's failing. And nobody's sharing that. Nobody's saying, I tried this, there was no market. That's the point. The point is to just, you are going to make a competitive business out of this, and you're going to go on the only thing that's proved to be working, and the other stuff you just ignore and it's just garbage, right?
But there I would say that is though to avoid a replication crisis in the startup, because you want to get to a point where this is going to work each and every single time, by no matter who does it.
By no matter who does it.
And that's when it comes to an experimental design.
Then you have to live with what's known as the file drawer effect. Right. People will waste time on stuff that's known not to work, but they didn't know that it wasn't going to work ahead of time.
Right. That's right.
So that's the thing. Right. So there is a slight difference between, one advantage, and again, thinking of these different cultural conflicts, is if you want to innovate and get to something that will work every time, then you can't have metric kind of events, because otherwise it just becomes box ticking. Right. So you have to be comfortable with keeping going until it's good. And not try to have the goal be, how many X did I do? How many patents did I file? How many whatever. You have to be a bit more patient with getting it right. Right. So this is something that was common practice in the lab where I worked, was you come up with an experimental design, you pilot it, you have a look at the data, and not to see, we already see an effect, great, go ahead. It was more of, is there potentially something? And if there is, let's try to see which aspect of the experimental design we can streamline more to, improve data quality, to have or improve instructions for the participants, because it became clear. Things like that. That's okay. Like, I think you need to pilot that kind of stuff. But when you keep doing that, from my perspective, you are already it's a fail-safe against a replication problem you might have later on. Because what you actually start to do is you start pilot, and then you pilot again, and then you have the next iteration of your design. You actually are already replicating for yourself and seeing the consistency of that effect. And when you see that, and let's say that were to be common practice, I don't think we would have any type of crisis. No, but I think one issue, right? So again, this this means that no one can say, not no one, but you can't be evaluated at a certain time.
That's true.
You need to be at this benchmark by this time.
That's impossible.
Because if you need to be at this benchmark by this time, and you're still iterating, then what you will do is you will try to force it to fit this benchmark. Right? That's a known problem.
That's a known
Likewise, then you can't have you can't have something like an ethical rule that limits the amount of iterations you can do.
Right.
Or you shouldn't have to ask approval every time you need new pilots or something like this, because now you're introducing boundaries, which now pull you away from being able to iterate as many times as possible till you get it right. Right. So again, this is all this kind of stuff that like this is the kind of things that you part of management training should give you to recognize this space where these things conflict. And not to just pretend that it doesn't exist.
Agreed. My final question, almost, is now we see a lot of, so this is tied into the publish and perish and the grant structure in the academic system, is to you normally have to apply for grants, you have to write these insanely long grant proposals that are then evaluated. It takes a lot of time. Normally writing one of those, what's that? 6 months. Then you apply, then you maybe get it. And then when you get it, what has passed? 1 year maybe? And then you are still bound to, you cannot hire always IT people to help you out. You can only do this, and then et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to, when I look now in industry-wise and entrepreneurship, and I try to look at where can I see this similar pattern. If you think of venture capital, you have to do something very similar. You have to say, okay, this is the direction we want to go. Please give me money so we can do it. but they don't just give you money.
No, of course not.
Right? Of course not.
They want to see that you're good. They want to see
exactly. Now, I've been wondering, do you think when it comes to academic research, how do you think other types of funding opportunities for it can play a role? And to give you a concrete example, I read about this one researcher. He was a chemist. He was working at a company, and at some point he decided, I don't want to do this anymore. He basically started his own lab. He was working by himself, for himself, and he got his funding from crowdfunding platforms.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, this is like an insanely unorthodox way if you think about the traditional academic system. This would be, I don't know, maybe seen as crazy or something.
Yeah, but it also could be tolerated.
Exactly. So what do you think this is a potential way of how things can develop?
I would hope this type of like alternative sources of models would be, right? So for instance, so a university then would need to just be okay with it. And some are more than
or
others.
No more university involvement.
Or no more, right, that's true.
Let me say, with fMRI, you cannot just buy a machine like
that. There's the infrastructure, and then there's also, I think where it gets a little bit gray is suppose you are working with patients or human subjects, right?
Yes.
There are laws against, me starting a lab in my garage through crowdfunding and inviting patients with some neurological disorder to come in, right? So you often do have to be associated with some sort of institute, right?
Or you can collaborate, I guess,
or something like this. I think it seems to me this is not that difficult because, for instance, like you could set yourself up as a BV, a limited liability company.
Yeah, definitely.
You could charge for your services to run lab tests.
Yeah.
And those lab tests could be experiments, right?
Exactly.
And you could maybe qualify as a partner in some of these industry academia grants, right?
Yeah.
You also, it is not like there are grants. I can't name them, but certainly I know there's grants in Canada, and I'm sure there's EU. I know there's EU grants too for SMEs to do research and innovation.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are. So the society is ready for non-academic institutes to be doing research activities based on public funding.
Agreed. No, I think this is something that. This is an option that's so new, like almost on the horizon, that I think a few researchers should really consider this because they want to continue. I know they want to go down the academic work, but not the academic career. So what I mean is that's want to stay. They want to stay in science, but they don't want to stay in academia.
Yeah.
So and often people, I personally don't think these are the same thing. Yeah. Academia is a system
of course,
implemented to do science.
Yes, I agree with you.
Right? Yeah. And you can also do this in a different way potentially.
Yeah, well, I think so. So I think what it would I think it's already starting to happen.
Yeah.
So it would require, like I say, like there you need some sort of mechanism where you can get money to do it. So crowdfunding would work, or these grants. But these grants would probably require you then to specify your structure. So what are you? If you're not affiliated with a university, then are you a BV? Or are you trying to start a startup? Are you? What are you? Right. So you there is always going to be something like that. So you will have to fit yourself to the specific criteria of the funding. Right. That kind of thing.
No, I agree.
And so what can happen is on the university side, often I think there are professors, of course, who also have businesses, right?
Yeah.
Then you're talking about IP issues maybe, or your division of time and labor and all this kind of stuff. But assuming you can reach some sort of agreement, which are possible, depending on a particular policy, then you yourself and your BV could be going, no reason not that you couldn't be going to VC for money.
Exactly. I totally agree. Yeah. And there are a lot of R&D types of startups that exist and get a lot of
so that already exists.
That already exists, and I think that should not be.
But maybe people aren't encouraged to do it, or people.
I think they don't know about it.
That's right. People aren't. Yes, the student who knows about PhD and becoming a professor is less likely to know about this, that, and
because in all honesty, I had no idea about the academic career path at all. I just wanted to do a PhD because at that time I thought, well, I like what I did during my master's, might as well get paid for it. That was my motivation.
Yeah.
That was all. And only later on I understood, like, oh, this is how this is working. And so I'm not saying anybody who doesn't know this is at any fault, but or anybody that they're not being trained on this. These are things that are just developing, but should be considered. It could be considered as something very valuable. Now, my final question for you, and this is an easy one, is so for anybody who is listening now, do you have any sources or resources or books that you would recommend? Maybe specific, because you are also at the intersection of business, industry, and academia. Do you have maybe specific books you would recommend academics to read? And maybe other specific books you would suggest industry people to read that listen now?
Yeah. So for academics, I mean, it would be good to read the Lean Startup. Right? So Eric Ries, Lean Startup. It is my impression. It is kind of the default way most people I've seen in the world now are thinking about entrepreneurship. It's starting to be challenged, I know, because when you read it, you start to say, okay, it's not the only way of doing things, but it is probably the at least about the iterations.
It's a good framework.
It's a good framework, and especially as a scientist to think about, one, not being so nerdy and actually getting out and talking to people.
Right.
And two, also thinking as an experimenter, like A/B testing. Let's try this. So that's a good one.
Yeah.
On the management side, looking into this thing called the Competing Values Framework by Cameron and Quinn, not related to me, but that's a great book to really understand these kinds of cultural conflicts that I think really reflects this issue in publishing versus motivating people versus impact factors versus doing proper science. I think this is an excellent framework, and that's a management book.
Okay.
Right? On the industry side. One thing that's kind of encouraging is I remember reading, it's a book by, I think it's Eric Schmidt from Google. So it's called How Google Works.
That's a good book.
That's a good book.
And
I think that's a good book because it can remind you about where academia has actually helped industry.
Yeah.
So this book came out in the 90s when maybe, as far as I can tell, industry was a bit more what's good for the shareholder, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's not good for the shareholder, we're not doing it. Something like this, right? And so pushing towards just whereas this book was of course Google has this famous, although I've never seen it in practice, but the idea of allowing your employees one day a week to do something that's creative, right? I think they were inspired by academia in terms of how academia is pretty good at interviewing people, kind of asking people to come in, what have you done? What are you planning to do? Like this kind of thing. I think if the book, I haven't read it in a while, but it was inspired by the committee search type thing of academic, and where academia is good at training people to be independent thinkers and to be problem solvers. And you're hiring a person for their ability to be creative and inventive and not just say, what's my job? How much do I get paid? What are my performance metrics, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that would, I think, is a good book, kind of in a way going the other way.
It's what I found interesting is what that the founders of Google, was it Sergey Brin and Larry Page, right?
Yeah.
That they took what they learned during their PhDs at Stanford, which they didn't finish in the end. They basically took that system and started it at Google and treating a lot of their employees basically like PhD students.
There you go. Yes, that's right. And the book, I think, deals with this
very interesting. Right. And what I also found very interesting, I don't know if that's a more recent change in management, was that they basically told their managers, you can have as many people working for you as you want, but you have to convince them to work for you for this project that you want to do. You don't just get 10 assigned and then they will code away for you. No. You can have as many as you want, but you need to convince these people to get on board and behind your project.
Right. So it's more, it is, yeah, you're right. It's more person focused.
It's much more person
It's much more
focused.
about like the right person. Yeah. Hire. I think the summary of how Google works is hire good people.
Yeah, hire good
right?
people.
Like I think that's kind of the main summary, which is something that academia has tried to focus on for years.
Yeah.
Right. And in a good way. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that was basically my last question. Ian, I want to thank you so much for the time you took. If people want to find you online or just, reach out to you, where can they find you?
LinkedIn would be good.
LinkedIn would be good.
So,
all right.
Ian G.M. Cameron.
All right. Ian G.M. Cameron. Nobody has to write this down. All of this will be in the show notes as well. Also, all the books and other types of content we mentioned. Thanks again, Ian. I had a great time, and thank you for taking the time.
Not a problem. I was happy to do it.
Yeah. And, to everyone listening, you have a great day.
Hey everyone, just one more thing before you go. I hope you enjoyed the show, and to stay up to date with future episodes and additional content we share, you can sign up to our blog and you'd get an email every Friday. Why Friday? Because it's almost weekend and we want to give a fun end of the week bonus that you can also talk about during your Friday afternoon drinks. It'll be a short email with our latest updates about bridging the gap between science and UX. The content we share ranges from conversations between UX and science, like we have on this podcast, our own journey from scientists turning into entrepreneurs, all the way to our own studies where we dig deeper into concepts of UX. If you want to receive that to stay in the loop, sign up at mind-trace.com/blog. mind-trace.com/blog.